The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Now on the show is 7:46. Time for Eye on the World with Selwyn Manning this morning. Good morning to you, Selwyn.
Yeah, good morning, Glenn. How are things?
Very good, thank you. Now let's look at the current situation over in Libya at the moment.
Yeah, what we've found is that, more of what we were reporting last week, Glenn, that the United States has agreed for the NATO request to extend a 48-hour extension to an American participation in the coalition airstrikes against Libya. So what that means is basically that lull that we saw late last week where the NATO nations had eased off a little bit with those airstrikes against pro-Gaddafi or Gaddafi loyalist strongholds, that the Gaddafi regime had taken advantage of that somewhat. So we've seen that the NATO leadership has requested the United States to increase its efforts again.
Okay. Now, if there's one thing that we know about America and its involvement in areas around the world is that they always send in their covert operations first, don't they? There's always like the CIA there in the background, perhaps a little bit of the British MI6 as well.
Yeah, that's right, and definitely as that the White House is navigating its domestic politics. Certainly we have seen that the CIA and, we've got to say the UK's MI6, they've been certainly inside Libya. Now we know that really from a lot of the raw data that we've been getting out of this whole situation up in that theatre around the Mediterranean area. And that raw data is being sourced by a guy that we mentioned briefly last week, Glenn, and he is a man who lives up in the Netherlands and is kind of monitoring a lot of the communications. Now, he is one of a series of many people that are monitoring such things that then feed into the internet. They're publishing that raw data into the internet. And people like ourselves, Glenn, for the first time really in history, have been able to then triangulate that information to see how that maps out with the statements coming from the country's governments themselves. What we know is, for example, we know when the CIA aircraft, for example, are delivering weapons into that region. We even know from the interceptions of the intercepts of that communication, the tail numbers, and we even know, due to this kind of plane spotting phenomenon around the world, what companies own those aircraft and are basically working in contract to the CIA. Well, one aircraft that we were tracking, for example, late last week, we tracked back to a place in Florida. That's where it's owned, but it's also, that company has been used in the past to ferry weapons in to Angola, for example, when rebels were trying to take Angola some years ago. So it's quite a network of information coming out, and it's really quite impressive.
We've also got some audio here, Selwyn, of a CIA flight out of Malta, a Lockheed aeroplane. Tell us about this.
Yeah, now this is one of the interceptions. If we just, is it ready to run? We'll have a bit of a listen to that communication there.
For runway 31, 6 Bravo. Bravo 1 runway 21. 96 Bravo, clear to backtrack 31. Go ahead, sir.
So what's that telling us, Selwyn?
What that awful noise is, it's basically the communications between this aircraft that is flying in CIA equipment into that region, and it's in aircraft communications between the people on the ground and also, the pilots in the aircraft. That raw information, for example, is also getting back into the whole mix here, like I was saying, into the public arena, so that we can tell where it's going, where it's landing, and then also, like I was mentioning before, the actual history of the aircraft and the people operating it. So what we found is within a couple of days of monitoring this and watching it, that we found that then we started to see a dialogue happening, for example, within the United States, talking about whether or not it should start to actually equip the rebels with weapons and get in there and have its own special forces starting to help organise the rebels on the ground in Libya. We knew from these communications, for example, and it wasn't just from one source, quite a number of different things, and also from rebels on the ground that were using Twitter to get information out, that had been going on for some days before the public debate on whether they should started to happen in America. I mean, it's a real insight into how the globe's Western nations and other nations actually work behind the scenes.
Because they're in a bit of a deadlock at the moment, aren't they? The Gaddafi forces aren't able to push the rebels back, and the rebels aren't able to push forward at the moment. There's kind of an invisible line there in the desert.
Yeah, it is. And like when we talked last week, for example, we could see that there was real momentum to the rebels heading westward across the top of Libya near the Mediterranean coast. What we found the next day, for example, that the closer it got to Tripoli, that's when we noticed that the NATO forces started to actually ease off their airstrikes and others against pro-Gaddafi facilities. And then we saw the Gaddafi loyalists rise up and really push the rebels right back. And there are fights happening now in towns, for example, that were thought to have fallen, that the pro-loyalists had fallen, but it certainly wasn't the case. We're also getting reports back now that is real intelligence-type reports, just to bolster up some of those, that scenario we gave about the CIA being in there. We're getting intelligence reports coming out saying that it does appear that there has been infiltration into the rebel groups by Gaddafi's special forces. So it's a totally different picture. Each day presents a different picture, Glenn.
What about talk of a diplomatic resolution to the situation there in Libya?
Yeah, I mean, this is all breaking news right now. Overnight, so it was Monday Northern Time, there was a delegation that went across from Libya representing Gaddafi to Malta, and they were meeting with envoys from Greece, and also we understand Kofi Annan, he's the former United Nations Secretary General, and they were meeting to try and find a way through all of this to stop the casualties and obviously to stop the fighting. Now the word was late last night, and it seems to be extended this morning, that the message was all Gaddafi's people have to do is to cease the fighting. We need a ceasefire, and then the NATO-led forces would ease back, and some sort of diplomatic resolution may be in evidence, creeping toward a diplomatic resolution then. So today it looks like Gaddafi's people are very much under pressure. They know that they're losing this war. They have no ability really with their material on the ground to really hold their country. And really the situation is either some sort of stalemate, there's a three-way thing here, some sort of stalemate, some sort of post-Gaddafi government, or Gaddafi getting out of it quick. And we know that his foreign minister defected to the UK last week. And just to add on that we even know the aircraft, the time, and its route that it took, thanks to that open source data that's coming through.
We're seeing now footage of people partying in Tripoli. Now, this was being shown by state television. This is kind of odd, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very weird. What we're seeing there is footage that came out yesterday. Now, this is like Party Central. You even got kids dancing in this footage. And what we're seeing is that this is happening at the same time as we know that Gaddafi has sent an envoy to Malta to try and broker some sort of peace accord. Now, what the Libyan people are seeing, from the official state channel is that kind of celebration going on in the streets, as if it's like like a New Year's Eve type of nonsense. It's really strange stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, any final words there, Selwyn?
Just that what we're seeing in the final kind of thing there is that the Arab nations that are supporting the NATO-led coalition, those are countries like Qatar, for example, that have strong Western ties, their involvement seems strictly to be in that humanitarian area, and we do see a lot of footage starting to come out, and certainly through Al Jazeera and others, of that humanitarian assistance being given to the Libyan casualties, and that's by way of airlift back to Qatar, back to hospitals, and medics from Qatar on the ground, basically helping those who are injured to get to some sort of safety and to get some sort of care going there. So it's quite a comprehensive effort. Next week I'd like to kind of look at some of the geopolitical kind of manoeuvrings that are going on and get some sort of idea as to what is forming, what alternatives are forming, and whether or not the whole region as a whole is starting to take shape into something that we can expect in the next 6 months to kind of settle into.
I'll look forward to that next week. Thanks very much, Selwyn.
Okay, Glenn, take care.
Selwyn Manning there, scoop.co.nz.